Genesis 28. This week and for the next 5 Sundays, so for 6 weeks, I have stories lined up where I believe heaven and earth seem to come close. And in Celtic Christianity, they call those thin places. Have you ever stood somewhere that felt different? Where time slowed down, like a veil between heaven and earth was a little thinner than normal. If you listened closely enough, maybe you could hear the whisper of God behind the door. These thin places are spots where the boundary between what is sacred and what is ordinary just sort of wears away. Suddenly, you find yourself barefoot on holy ground. The surprise is that these places don't usually look like sacred or holy places. They're not usually, at least, they're not mountaintops or stained glass cathedrals. Sometimes a thin place is out in the wilderness. Sometimes it's in a wrestling match in the middle of the night. Spoiler alert for a couple of stories coming up. Or today, a roadside rock when someone had a dream about a ladder. These thin places are not always what you expect them to be, and yet it's in these places where God comes very close to humankind. We might argue God was already close, but we'll get to that. So through this series for 6 weeks, I want to look at different Bible stories, and I want to consider those sacred moments and listen for the voice of God in those thin spaces where divine breaks into human, where, where maybe you will find, that you are in a thin place in your own life, and that you're just not realizing the presence of God. Not because God wasn't present before, but because you just haven't really learned to see or hear properly. That's the goal, is for you to see and hear God better. Okay, so the passage today, Genesis 28, is a famous one, the story of Jacob's ladder. Before I read that story, I want to tell you another story. This one's from my personal life. How many of you have had a car break down on the side of the road? Like a car that you were in, right? You were in the vehicle and it broke down and you had to pull over and just wait on the side of the road. Raise your hands up high. Let's be embarrassed together. Okay. Yeah, it's a painful process. Wow, that's a lot of people. I didn't expect that many of you to raise your hands. I say something like, how many of you like cheeseburgers? And 3 people raise their hand. And I know statistically you're lying. And then I say, how many of you have broken down the side of the road? Like every hand goes up. Oh yeah, we've all had that. Wild. You guys are wild. Well, it happened to me. Thankfully, it's only happened once. But it did happen in a very unfortunate place. So we weren't near anything, not close to help. We were just stuck. There's like a silence, an eerie silence when you're in that place. You hear cars fly by and then just nothing. And then another car drives by and then nothing. You're just waiting awkwardly on the side of a road. I don't know. I feel like in those moments you start to ask questions you wouldn't have even thought to ask when you're cruising 75 miles per hour down the interstate, or when the radio's blaring, or when the kids are arguing in the back seat. Like there are always all these other things to distract you. But when you're stranded on the side of the road, especially like we were, where there's not really cell signal or very minimal cell signal, it forces you to just be. You just have to be there, stuck in that place. And I think God shows up in some of those moments. We were outside of Muncie, Indiana, a long stretch of road between a bunch of cornfields with very little phone signal, no one around, just an occasional car. We were driving from Indiana back to Ohio from visiting family, and the oil pump went out in my old Dodge Ram. And I saw the oil pressure dropping. I was like, what is going on? So I pulled over, and by the time I pulled over and got to the side, it had basically seized up at that point. And so we were stuck. And in that moment, there was no shade. It was in the summer, so it was very hot, mosquitoes everywhere. The kids were sweating and restless, and I couldn't turn the truck on to turn the AC on. We just got out and stood on the side of the road. And it was rough, to be honest. I was mentally calculating the damage to my bank account. Like I just knew this was going to be expensive. And even just a tow truck bill from out in the middle of nowhere was going to be outrageous. And then I'd have to get it fixed, which was very expensive. I sold that truck right afterwards. I just felt like it was cursed. While I'm pacing, literally back and forth on the side of the road and kind of just mentally in my head pacing, I realized that we were stuck. We were not where we had been with family. We weren't yet home. We were somewhere toward the middle of that trip, and we just were stuck. And I don't like feeling stuck. Maybe you've been there, and maybe you have felt stuck at some point in your life. A job that ended, and the next one hasn't really popped up yet. You're kind of in limbo. Maybe it's faith that you feel like you used to have, and now you have lots of doubt, and you're not sure what to believe. Maybe it was a marriage that's been wounded, but it's not over yet. Maybe it's salvageable. You're just stuck. Maybe it's grief that you've tried to process, but it just won't quite resolve. I don't know. I think we often find ourselves being stuck somewhere in the middle place, somewhere where we're not where we were meant to be and not where we're going. We're just kind of in the middle. I think those in-between places are often thin places where heaven and earth come closer together than we imagine. I want to read about one of those in Genesis 28. I'm going to start in verse 10 and read through verse 22. Jacob, if you don't know who that is, that's the son of Abraham and Isaac. So grandson of Abraham, son of Isaac, the third in the great triad of Israelite ancestry, right? This is Jacob. He becomes Israel after the wrestling match with God. It's all a big deal. Okay, Jacob, famous guy. He left Beersheba and he went toward Haran. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. So basically it got late at night and he had to stop and camp out. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and he lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants. And your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And by you and your descendants shall all the families of the earth bless themselves. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done that of which I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. If there's a key verse this morning, it's verse 16. Jacob awoke from his dream and said, surely God is here, and I didn't even realize it. And he was afraid, and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone which he had put under his head, and he set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. So then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of that you give me, I will give a tenth to you. So Jacob makes an oath to God, sets up a tithe arrangement, and almost like strikes a bargain. Like, if you're really God and this is all true, then I will follow you all my life and give you the first of everything. It's a beautiful story. It's the beginning of Jacob's new end, that he is going to inherit the promise of his father and grandfather, that he will be the leader of the Israelites, the father of the 12 tribes, all this beautiful stuff that's going to happen in Jacob's life. But it began with a dream while he was sleeping on a rock in the middle of a trip from one place to another. And he was just sort of stuck in the middle of the night. And God showed up. It's an amazing story. All the writer tells us is that this is a place. In the Hebrew, or even in the Greek Septuagint, it's just a place. Just a place. There's no name. Bamakom. Now, later, this is kind of cool. The word for place, Bamakom, it becomes a name for God. Ha-makom, the place. And that becomes a substitute name for God among Jews. Some of you may have already known that. But an alternate name for God, if you don't know, the word God is from ancient Germanic for good. So we say God because it means the ultimate good. Have you ever wondered why we say God? Maybe you haven't. Maybe you just blindly do whatever you're told. But I question things. I'm like, why do we call him God? That's not his name. Why do we call him that? Well, it's because it's an ancient Germanic word for good. Okay? Well, the Hebrew people, they weren't allowed to use the name of God, so they used substitutes like the Lord, Adonai, which means Lord or Master. Well, they also used the word Hamakom. Now, modern-day Jews often use the word Hashem, which means the name The name is a name for God because they can't say the name. But Hamakom is probably my favorite name for God. The place. He's the place. Whatever place it is, God is there. That's pretty cool. I don't think Jacob was trying to be hyper spiritual. I don't think he knew that a preacher in Ohio would talk about how cool that was thousands of years later. He wasn't heading to a shrine. In this story, when he took a nap, we don't believe he was going anywhere to do any religious stuff. He wasn't looking for God necessarily. He was running away, actually. In the story, he's running. He's afraid. He's not at home. He doesn't really have a home. He's had to flee. There's no plan. There's just a rock to use as a pillow in a place without a name. He was really stuck. And yet here, on the outskirts of everything familiar, heaven is torn wide open to him. He sees visions of heavenly things and the voice of God. Walter Brueggemann says, Bethel, this place that Jacob names, the house of, Beit El means house of God. So that's what the name means. This is the house of God. That place is the assurance that God could be present even in the midst of homelessness, alienation, and failure, not just in times of stability and success. Think about that. Jacob, who's fleeing from his own home and doesn't know where to go, he's on the run, finds God while he's homeless and alienated and on the run. That's amazing, that God shows up to people wherever they might be. Because I do think we think we have to get ourselves together and then God will show up. It just doesn't work like that. Maybe the holy ground isn't behind us or in front of us. Maybe you are standing on it right now, and you don't even realize it. The ladder in this story is not for escaping, it's for revealing. Jacob may have first dreamed of it as his escape hatch. Like, look, God's giving me a ladder. I can get out of this, pardon the phrase, this hellhole that I'm in, whatever it is, and get to the other side with God, because whatever's happening right now is not good. It's not pretty. Issues with his brother Esau and issues with his parents and all this stuff. He's got problems. Maybe this is God saying, I'm going to get you out of this. But that's not the way it's presented. In fact, the word here is best or closely related to a ziggurat. So think less of a ladder or a flight of stairs and think more of the stairs at like Aztec ruins, like Chichen Itza. Anybody know what that is? Okay, well, think of pyramids that have stair steps. Ancient ziggurats in the Semitic culture were basically like shrines that went up toward the heavens, and they had stairs to climb to get God to come down to you, and you'd give an offering and they'd come down and receive the offering, at least metaphorically. Think of that picture. So it's like a place where humans and God can kind of connect. It's a forced thin place. God creates a real one in this vision. It's kind of amazing. This dream flips the script. The ladder isn't something Jacob has to climb up to get to God. It's something that the messengers of God can come down upon so that grace descends rather than effort ascending. That might be one of my better sermon points, so I'm going to repeat it. In Christian faith, grace descends, not effort ascending. You're not working your way up to God. God has descended in grace to you. In fact, I kind of hate the translations that I read this week. Pretty much every English translation says God was above him on the ladder. But the best translation is actually beside him or next to him, which I think changes the whole story. It's not like Jacob looks up to God in the heavens. He's like, I wish I could get up there with you. Rather, God comes down and stands beside Jacob and says, I've made a way to be with you. And that obviously connects to the gospel message about Jesus. God, he's not waiting at the top for you to earn your way to heaven. God comes to you wherever you are, even when you're homeless and running away from your own family. It doesn't matter. God comes to him. God is really never far away. The Apostle Paul said that. God is never far away. He's right there. He's always there. It's just that people don't see God. They don't recognize the presence of God. But I do think that we suffer from deism, which is this idea that there's a God, but he's like way out there somewhere. A lot of the early founding fathers were deists. They believed in God, but it's kind of this generic, like God who's aloof, who's up on a perch in the heavens, kind of looking down on us. Some of you think that. I mean, if you were really honest, you think God is like a bearded grandfather figure who's sitting up in a heavenly perch watching you from above. But that's not the biblical image of God. In Scripture, God is this loving being. He is being itself. He's not even a person, right? He's a person, but he's more than a person. He's all that is, and all that is imbued with the energies of God. Like, it's so complicated, we can't even explain it. Everything that is because God. God is that force that made everything, and that God is always present with you. He's not some grandpa that's far away. He is a loving father, but he's right there with you. And Jacob needed to remember that. I think Jacob started to feel like if everyone else is abandoning him, or if he's having to run away from everyone else, then God has probably left too. That's the saddest thing about difficult moments in life, is that we often not only attribute them to God, but we assume God has abandoned us in those moments. How many of you have not had the uncomfortable suspicion that in your dark moments, God is far away? And ironically, that's when God is the closest. That's why the story is so helpful. God refuses to leave Jacob. He ran away from his family, but he could not run away from his God. And God's promises don't wait for our worthiness. If we're honest, Jacob is not in a good place, morally or emotionally or spiritually or physically, sleeping on a rock, right? In pretty much every way possible, Jacob is in a bad spot. And he's not repenting. Now, this story challenges some of my own, at least my previously held theology. Jacob isn't even penitent at this point. I don't see him in contrition, fasting, putting on ashes and sackcloth and saying, God, I'm such a failure, please forgive me. He's still on the run. He hasn't repented of anything. He's hiding, in fact. And yet God shows up anyway. It would be good enough to have a God who would love me the moment I say I'm sorry, who would be ready to forgive me, but to have a God who's already come halfway out to meet me before I've ever said sorry. I'm thinking of the prodigal son and the father. A God who comes to me before I've even fully repented and says, I'm here for you. How much better is that? And what does God say? He says the same thing he said to Abraham and to Isaac. He says, this land will be yours. Your descendants are going to cover the earth. And I will bless you to be a blessing. I will be with you. I will keep you. You will be mine. I will be your God, and we're going to do great things. It's not a contract. There's no preconditions that have to be met. It's just a covenant of faithful love. Richard Rohr says, we can't attain the presence of God because we are already totally in the presence of God. What's absent is not God, but our own awareness. I struggle with this a lot. God is not the one who's absent, it's my awareness. And I wonder if the same is true for you in your day-to-day life, how easy it is to forget that God is with you, that God has not abandoned you. Grace doesn't wait on your performance. It meets you at your weakest point. God is there for you at the bottom of the ladder. He's not waiting for you to climb up. He comes down to you. I think when Jacob wakes up, he's not going to say, wow, that explains everything, which is what I want. When God gives me a vision, I want it to be answers. Like I want to wake up and think, now it all makes sense. But every time God gives a vision in the Bible, almost every time, it is more confusing than the real life situation. It's like God makes it more convoluted and more complicated. So now Jacob's on the run from his family, and also there's a ladder to heaven with angel messengers. What does that mean? But he doesn't need to know what it means. Again, something I struggle to accept in my own Christian walk. I don't need to understand it. In fact, maybe I shouldn't understand it. That might ruin it. I need to trust. I need to see that God is with me, even if it doesn't make sense. Awe, real awe, A-W-E, worship, doesn't lead to comprehension. It leads to consecration. It leads to something holy. I feel like I come to God for answers, and God isn't giving answers. God is giving God's self. He's giving love and faithfulness, which is what I actually need. I don't need answers. Answers wouldn't fix anything. They would just give me things to try to further fix myself, and then I'll screw it up even more. So instead, God says, I think I know you well enough. You're going to mess this up. Why don't you let me do it, and you learn to trust me and love me in return? But that's a lot harder for me. So when Jacob wakes up, he doesn't say, oh, now I understand. He says, wow, God is here, even in this place. I need to remember this. He sets up an altar with the stone, the very rock he slept on. He says, I'm going to anoint this with oil. I'm going to remember this as a house of God. This is a place where God met with me. He doesn't need it to make sense. All he needs to know is that God was there. He names the mystery. He marks it as holy. I think reverence is the recognition that the world is full of mystery, that we're not God or gods, and that it's good. It is good to be small in the presence of God. And most of my life, I'm trying to be big. Since I was born, I've been trying to be big. And God says, it's much better to just accept that you're small. And that's really hard to do, especially if you have a toxic ego. Not that I have one, that's fine. You have one, I don't have one. I'm great. I do think some places you understand. I think God helps you to understand some things. But others, when you can't understand, you just anoint. You just set them apart and say, this is a place that I leave to God because I can't understand it. I know you have places in your life like that. Are you prepared to anoint them and just give them to God? He names it the house of God. There's no steeple. There's no choir. There's no worship band. There's no altar until he uses a pillow rock. And even then, that's a makeshift altar at best. There is a fugitive. There is a God who refuses to abandon his child. And so it is a sacred place. It doesn't need the trappings of religion. And neither do you. I think it's good to go to church. I think you need the community of the church. But we all know it's not and we don't even have stained glass. We have the fake stickers that look like stained glass, that's like my greatest pet peeve in this entire church facility. I try not to even talk about them because I hate it so much. I love stained glass, and that's just, it's like drinking soy milk when you wanted a glass of milk. And you're like, this isn't really milk. Like this is, or what is it? Skim milk's even worse because then it's just milk. It's just water pretending to be milk, right? I don't know what it is. It's gross. I'd rather have soy milk than skim milk. And I'd rather have no windows than fake stained glass windows. But the point is, you don't need any of this. I'm sorry, guys. I have really bad ADHD. You don't need any of this, right? You don't need the pretty screens and lights and the piano and the worship team and the windows and the pews. Because we can't just sit in normal chairs like normal people. We got to sit in big, long benches that feel religious. Whatever it is, right? With all this stuff, they are nice benches. Don't worry, we're not trying to throw them out or anything. They're still good benches. But my point is, none of this makes it a God place, right? There are plenty of beautiful church buildings that are empty, that serve no purpose, some that are decrepit at this point and falling apart. It was never the pretty religious stuff. What makes it a God place is that God is there and people who are willing to acknowledge God's presence and be aware of it. Sadly, you don't do that at home or at work, so you have to come here and make up a place where we can acknowledge that God is here. What I'm trying to tell you is that when you leave here, God is still there too. It's not like God is just here. You don't have to come here for God. You come here to be with God's people and worship and grow and study, and we do a lot of good, important things here, but God is there because God is literally everywhere. I hope that makes sense. God isn't just at Bethel, or maybe what I'm trying to say is Bethel is the whole world. The whole world is the house of God. You can't escape the presence of God. You can't run away from God. He doesn't have to show up on back roads and when you break down on the side of the road because he was already there with you. But often in those moments when you're broken down, when you're tired, when you feel spent, when you don't see a way forward, then you realize that God was there, that God still is there. I wonder what your Bethel moments look like. The time in the hospital when you couldn't even pray, but somehow God gave you peace. Maybe it was a season when your faith was failing and you were filled with doubt and questions, and yet you felt grace lingering, even when your belief was struggling. Maybe it was that night in the car when you just started talking out loud and you didn't even know why or who you were talking to. Or for me, it was sitting crumpled up on my bedroom floor talking to the wind and crying. And it's a story I'll share another time, but I felt like God actually hugged me. It was crazy, but it was really special. There are those moments where you just feel overwhelmed and you don't know what to do, and God is there. God is there. He's always been there. That stretch of highway outside of Muncie, Indiana, that is now a core memory, not just because it cost me $4,356, but because I remember my kids laughing in the grass on the side of the road. I remember appreciating things that I had taken for granted, like cell phone signal, where I had to walk down the street until I could get just enough, like 1 or 2 bars to call her family, Kylie's family, to come save us and to get a tow truck to pick up the truck. And it's nice to be able to just drive across states. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I stood there and I remembered people in years gone by had to ride horse and buggy to go anywhere, or just horseback. They didn't have a modern truck to drive from Ohio to Indiana and back in 2 or 3 days and make a quick visit to see grandparents. Just that ability is a blessing. So many things that I just take for granted. The money in the bank to fix the truck when I knew I'd have to pay for it, and I thought, we should be able to pay for this. God has taken care of us. We have a little bit in savings. All those things that I had just sort of taken for granted. The rescue power of family who show up when you need them, even though you just left them 2 hours ago. And you give them a call and say, hey, you want to drive to Muncie and pick us up? It's all those things, the relationships, the people in my life, the blessings in my life. We were stuck. We weren't home yet. We weren't with family anymore. We weren't where we had been. We were in that moment stuck. And that's exactly where God showed up. Would you stand with me as we close? I now, in hindsight, I understand something deeper. God didn't show up because God was there. God was there the whole drive home. God was there when the kids were fighting in the back seat. He was there when I turned the radio up louder and louder to drown it out. And he was there when, because of all that, I didn't notice the oil pressure falling until it was a little too late. God was there for all of that. He was there when Kylie said, it's going to be okay. Please don't freak out. And I said, I'm not freaking out. I'm fine. So God was there. God was there for all of it. God has always been there. Always. So, maybe you're in the middle of nowhere right now. Metaphorically, right now you're in church. You're stuck on the side of something. You've been sleeping on a rock. You don't know what's going to happen next. I hope that you can see what Jacob saw. That God is beside you, connected to you, that grace is descending in your life, and that you don't have to climb your way out of it. That God will come to you right where you are. That God not only visits when you need him, but he abides. And then may you wake up and have the courage to say, surely the Lord was in this place, and I just didn't know it. Amen.